all. We thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Philip Zakarowski of the Friends of the Walpole Public Library, and we, along with the Walpole Historical Society, is sponsoring this evening's talk, and is part of our series of talks about the 300th anniversary of Walpole. So we're joining in on that, celebrating our 300th anniversary. And tonight's talk is particularly pertinent because it's Sir Robert Walpole, no saint, no Spartan, no redeemer. And it answers the question, who was Sir Robert Walpole, and why is Walpole named after him? So we're very honored tonight to have Michael Lepage, who will be an acting Sir Robert Walpole. And Michael is no stranger to Walpole. He's a member of the Walpole Historical Society. He's done numerous reenactments in Walpole, and he for the Historical Society. When we did the library opening for the new building, he enacted, I have to look at my, he enacted Benjamin Franklin. I couldn't just escape you there. And he's also been back to the Library Friends, or to the Historical Society. He did a Christmas reading of A Christmas Carol, and he's also done Paul Revere. So he is often seen in Boston because he is an actor in the Faneuil Hall area, and so you may see him there as well. So we're very honored to have him. And just to note that he fit us in. He's very busy, and he said, I have to do Sir Robert Walpole, Sir Robert Walpole because of Walpole. So he made this work for us, so very honored to have him do that. So please join me in a warm, oh yes, and there, if you see over here, it may be hard to see it in the darkness, but that's a painting of Sir Robert Walpole that came from the main meeting room in the town hall, came from the old town hall, and it's been hanging in one of the town halls for many years.
A stunning likeness.
A stunning likeness. So please join me in a warm welcome to welcome Sir Robert Walpole.
Did you enjoy the hunt last month, sir? Gentlemen, we all went hunting last week, I believe. And were most successful. Indeed. It is so good to be here this evening. And I am so honored and touched that you have named your dear town after me here in the colonies. Perhaps it is because for 20 years I have done my best to keep Great Britain, including these colonies, out of war, at peace, and prospering. And there is another part of me. I am a politician, but I do have a heart that thinks very much of places such as Walpole, Massachusetts, because you are all good country people, country squires, yeoman farmers, the very sort of people I was born and raised with in Norfolk, in the countryside, most specifically at Houghton Hall. I was born in 1676, if we may go down memory road, the third son and the fifth child of 19 children. Indeed. 19 children. I will say it again for emphasis. But the most important thing to remember is that I was the third son. The third son, which means what? It means I am not going to inherit the property, does it? No, that would be my older brother, Edward, and my second oldest brother, Burwell, perhaps a military commission, and if you can believe it, dressed as I am, as the third son, I was destined for the clergy of the Church of England. In fact, after a private grammar school education, I attended Eton and King's College in Cambridge to be a member of the clergy. Imagine me rising to the pulpit on Sundays to give you a good sermon every Sunday, or perhaps you do not wish to imagine it and have attended the House of Commons and heard what I have to say. But tragedy would strike our family. Both of my older brothers passed away young. So suddenly, from being the third son, ladies and gentlemen, I was the first son. And my father, the colonel, also Edward, summoned me to come home so that he could tutor me in the management of the estate. But of course, I could not just stay at home and manage the estate. I had to find other pursuits. And what better pursuits than becoming involved in politics? I, of course, was an MP for Castle Rising and then King's Lynn, and my life in government began.
The political scene that Robert Walpole entered was a turbulent one. With the death of King William in 1702, Anne ascended the throne. She did so as the Protestant sister of Queen Mary, because the former king and queen had no children. When she died in 1714, there was great confusion. She had suffered through several miscarriages and stillborn births, and even the death of her 11-year-old son, the Duke of Gloucester, which left the throne vacant. The next in line was Sophia of Hanover, and she died 2 months before Anne. The crown passed to her son, the Prince Elector of Hanover, who ruled as King George I. 56 Catholic heirs were passed over. If that was not enough, there was Parliament, particularly the House of Commons, with its endless battles between the two political parties, the Whigs and the Tories. Two armed camps that were vying for power, and there was no thought of spirited debate followed by drink and bawdy joke afterwards. They went to different coffee houses, taverns, social clubs. They read different newspapers, and they were always exultant in their victories and the other party's defeats. In stepped Robert Walpole, destined to become the First Lord of the Treasury, Chancellor of the Exchequer, and ruler of the House of Commons.
And there I was, married to my dear wife, Catherine, with 6 children eventually, involved in party politics. Whigs and Tories, Tories and Whigs, enemies, reading different newspapers, attending different social clubs and public houses, and calling each other names. I do hope in the future that that name-calling business will not continue. As I remember, according to the Tories, we were Gaelic Scottish horse thieves, and we considered them to be Irish Catholic rebels, each side vying to win. And all of this time, I like to think that my star was rising. I made myself indispensable to the lady on the throne at that time, Queen Anne, and most importantly, to her husband, Prince George. You see, Prince George is, there they are now. Prince George, his brother, was on the throne of Denmark. But enemies. I'm sure over here in the colonies, there are 2 parties and enemies who try to destroy each other. Perhaps not with the vigor in Parliament, but my enemies found charges against me of venality and corruption regarding Scotland. And they succeeded. They succeeded so much so that I was convicted and sent to the Tower of London for 6 months. 6 months in the Tower of London. Yet, I do have money, ladies and gentlemen, you might have noticed. So I was not sharing a cell with someone else. I had my own chamber. I was most comfortable and well taken care of, and I was innocent. And the greatest of all triumphs was when I was released, I was reelected. What better conceit can a man have than that? And I became an advisor to Caroline, the Princess of Wales. So much so that when His Majesty King George I passed away, and the Prince of Wales ascended to the throne as King George II, his dear wife, upon becoming queen, made sure that I was not gotten rid of and I was kept around for my advice. It does help to know the right people.
The 1700s brought forth a new age of commerce with joint stock companies and government bonds, which created growth through public and private credit. This provided opportunity for investors to amass great fortunes through seemingly endless opportunities. To protect this ever-expanding maritime trade, insurance companies were created. It was believed by the policymakers in government, most importantly, Robert Walpole, that market profit would trickle down to all, including the colonies. The climate needed for this to continue was one of peace, particularly with the great European powers, such as France, Spain, Austria, and Holland. This was maintained, for the most part, by George Viscount Townshend, the Secretary of State and Walpole's brother-in-law.
I spent my time most often with domestic and not foreign affairs. I left foreign affairs to the skill of my brother-in-law, George Townshend. He had the skill to balance all of the great European powers against each other in a series of alliances. Think of it, even powerful France. France, Spain, Holland, Austria, and the others, so that not one of them would grow too powerful. That kept peace because everyone was afraid to go to war. What did that do? That provided worldwide trade in peace and profit. You see again, profit. But not just for the royal family or men of government, but for ordinary folk. And it captured the imagination all the way to here in the colonies. And for the people of Britain, thoughts of the Americas and the trade going on there with the maritime trade and yes, and the slave trade. Places such as Bengal, where East India Company set itself up for business to trade with China. Exotic things would come back from these places, such as parrots, fruits such as pomegranate and pineapple, tea from China, spices, sugar, and silk for clothing. Not just for royals, not just for wealthy country squires or merchants in London, but ordinary folk could purchase things that they never would have thought of before and could live in comfort in ways that they had never thought, all because of peace and trade. London, you must come see London. London is a metropolis that has not been seen since the times of ancient Rome. It is indeed. And also, in the countryside, gentlemen, such as myself, were building great mansions with all of this money that was coming in from all of this trade. What could possibly go wrong, ladies and gentlemen? Oh dear, South Sea Company.
The South Sea Company was just such a venture. It was formed to reduce the national debt and pay dividends to stockholders through Greenland fisheries and the slave trade to Central and South America. Steady returns in shares with limited liability were promised. You could only lose what you invested. Shares started at £100, and their price continued to climb. By 1719, the South Sea Company was competing with the Bank of England itself. Eventually, it was too much due to diminished returns and a great sell-off following, which deflated the shares, and panic set in.
South Sea Company. South Sea Company indeed, ladies and gentlemen. It had shown such great promise. You could not lose more than you paid in, from £100 a share, and rising until difficulties with the Spanish government as far as regulation and ports and, of course, smuggling all would rear their ugly head in years and years of trade with the Spanish. But shares would level off. People would start to reconsider. And as Mr. Hogarth has shown, they really did reconsider and started, as the stocks went down and down, to sell off, destroying the market and causing a great panic. A panic, well, Mr. Hogarth is not one of my friends, but we shall not get into him this evening. I could spend a whole half an hour if you wish. But suffice it to say, someone in government had to step in, and that would be the First Lord of the Treasury. Any guesses? That would be me. I held those 33 directors of the banks. I hope this does not happen in the future, banking crises and stock crises and company crises and failing and government having to step in. But indeed, I held those 33 gentlemen accountable and made them pay back all of the money that the investors had put in. And what was left was given to companies that could be trusted with it. East India Company, which I have already mentioned, but most importantly, the Bank of England. I thought perhaps it might make me the most popular man in the empire. For the most part, it did. I did have my detractors, though. Do we not all have detractors? Men in government and men outside of it. Writers, men of the quill. But in government, there were men such as Robert Harley, a Tory. Oh, we shall get to him. A Tory who made it his purpose in government to try to destroy the Bank of England and its business practices, but he failed utterly. He could find nothing and was disgraced. Even earls were caught up in it. The Earl of Stanhope and the Earl of Sunderland both were fellow Whigs, but he's still looking at me. But enemies in politics, but South Sea Company took care of them with the scandal. Now, I finally will get around to these men of the quill. Did you know that there's a poem written in my honor? Anyone? You have heard of Alexander Pope? He wrote a poem in my honor. Do you know what the name of it is? Do not. I will not have you arrested. You can laugh when I tell you the name of it. Dunciad. Guess who the Dunciad is? Perhaps it was because I was appointed Master of the Revels, which is a very powerful position. As Master of the Revels, anything that these men who write or are involved in theater productions of any kind must pass by me to be approved. If I do not think it is decent, it will not be seen. That is my revenge for Dunciad. And then there is our friend here, Mr. Swift. He of Gulliver's Travels fame. I cannot even say it. Gulliver's Travels fame. He also was a shill for South Sea Company, but he and Mr. Pope, as I have already mentioned, had to come to do my bidding for anything that they wished to be seen by the public. That is power, is it not? Well, then there is Dr. Samuel Johnson. He does not like me either. But do any of you know Dr. Samuel Johnson? Met him? I doubt you have, because he does not seem to like anybody. A chosen few, perhaps, who shall remain nameless, because no one has ever been able to identify them.
Robert Walpole had become the most powerful man in the British Empire. He had the patronage of members of the royal family and was the leader of the House of Commons. With that power came the need to display the wealth that came with it. Though he had other residences, most notably, the one we all know, was the residence of the Prime Minister, number 10 Downing Street in London. His favorite, though, was Houghton Hall in Norfolk, which is best known for its opulence and unlike anything else that had been seen in the countryside before. Soon, other men of wealth began to build grand mansions to match his. It was an age of great display in wealth and excess spurred on by the mercantile system of trade, and no one did it grander than Cock Robin.
Home. Thoughts of home. But also being able to do something about it. Being able to create a grand estate. Not that we were struggling with our old homestead, which I was born into, but with profit coming in, having saved this country from economic disaster, why not make my family comfortable and pursue my passions? Hunting, as we have already discussed, and of course art. But right about the time of the scandal, I believe, 1720, I decided that it was time to, let us say renovate, replace the old family home with a grand mansion. It took some time, and it took a great deal of money, and I did entertain as it was being built after the old one was torn down. Ah, look, I stand in its way. Is it not beautiful? Now, to get to that point, over that time, I believe 1729, it was finished and perfected. By 1735, I think of it now, it took a great deal of time. When it was done, there was a brand new manor house, and a new village. I hope you will be understanding when I tell you this part of the story. You see, the old village was right on the grounds of the estate. And discussion with the townspeople allowed for me to have it moved off of my property and nearby. I did take care of them, good people. Do not bicker. I did take very good care of them. They are invited to visit. But I ask you now to use your imaginations. Think of yourselves driving in a fine carriage on your way to the manor house. Look at the fields and the trees. Look at the landscaping. Is it not beautiful? And as you're riding towards the entrance of the manor house, you might see a hunting party with yours truly on a fine mount, and perhaps some of the gentlemen in this room of adventure. Perhaps it would be in the morning on our way out, or perhaps upon returning with fresh kill for dinner and mounting and all of that. Now, that being said, of course, after seeing the outside and arriving at the front door, you'll be escorted in, and I'm blocking you. I'll stand by my portrait. Look at that. As I said, a new manor house. All beautifully built with portraits. Now, I had mentioned art, and you could see on the walls the family, of course, but not only hunting, but a lover of art. I had friends of mine, political allies, and family scouring Europe for the masters. Raphael, Rubens, Rembrandt, decorating the walls from marble hall to stone hall to the salon to the staterooms. Is it not beautiful? It makes me long for home already. And if you are staying the night, of course, in those staterooms, you will each have a gilt mirror in each stateroom so that you make sure that you look proper for dinner. I believe I am. And servants' quarters right next door so they may be at your beck and call. I also had towers built, which the architect did not like, but it is my house, sir. And if I want towers, I will have towers. And as we dine, ladies and gentlemen, I made sure that the stables are far enough away so as not to be displeasing to you. Now, dining. And of course, congresses. Every November, I have congresses at Houghton Hall, the Whig Party, political allies, and we gather about, and of course, we toast His Majesty, God save the King. You will join me later, I am sure. And in public, we talk of the times, we talk of our popularity, and in private, we do what politicians do we not? We plan strategy, and we decide who is for us and who is against us and how to deal with them. Rewards, or how shall I put this, sir? Encouragements. Information on other politicians is always useful as well, I have found. But enough about politics for now. Let us think of just dining. Bless you, sir. Well, I think you can all come at once. Usually our dining parties are of about 30, but I think we can make proper accommodation for all of you. Think of yourselves, and dinners are, of course, family, friends, political allies. Cannot do anything without them. And neighbors. See, I provide for my neighbors. All sitting down, now think of it, up to our chins in beef, venison, goose, and turkeys. I think all till you are contented. And of course, to wash all of it down, a good glass of claret, perhaps. I'll have to save some of this for the end. So I will not imbibe now. Or perhaps a bowl of punch for all of us. Or beer, if you are like, who likes beer in this room? All right, I shall have plenty of beer as well. And so that we may all toast to His Majesty and toast to our future. And I shall have to make arrangements so that all of you are invited. I'm making them right now.
Robert Walpole, First Lord of the Treasury, Chancellor of the Exchequer, Leader of the House of Commons, Advisor to the King, savior of reputations from the South Sea scandal, and a great builder. So why is the town of Walpole named after him? Well, let's start with the early settlement. There you see, that is the extent of the original Dedham. The early settlement started in 1659 for what became Walpole. The sawmill was built in what was then the southern part of Dedham. As the mill began operation, along with the dam and the water wheel, a settlement grew around it, and as it did, the difficulties of attending church services at the New Dedham Meeting House, along with the taxes involved, became apparent. Everyone was obligated to attend services at the meeting at least once a month. In 1717, the town of Dedham agreed that the people of the old sawmill should be relieved of their poll tax, provided they paid for a church where they constantly hear. There'd be no reduction of the excise tax, however. You sound familiar? The meeting house in Medfield was not a solution. Thus came the need for separation. During this time, Royal Governor Samuel Shute of Massachusetts and New Hampshire sailed for England for an audience with King George I.
Politics. In 1721, good people of Massachusetts province, your royal governor, Samuel Shute, sailed across to London for an audience with His Majesty, King George I. And there he is now, he had the impertinence, he did, to say to His Majesty and spread the rumors around government that you no longer had any need for Great Britain and the Crown, and you felt yourself quite autonomous. Made the men in government rather displeased. There was talk of revoking the charter of Massachusetts Bay Province. I calmed and steadied nerves, madam. I did indeed. I calmed the good people, and I assured them that nothing could be further from the truth with the good people of Massachusetts, that they were loyal subjects. I did not interfere in your need to self-govern. Now think of it. Think of it indeed. London is 3,000 miles away. How can the House of Commons in session properly govern the people of these colonies, including Massachusetts? It cannot be done. So your charter was not revoked. The good men of government were calmed, including His Majesty, and Governor Shute failed in his propaganda. Because remember, from the beginning of our talk, the distance requires that you govern yourselves under British authority. And I am still the country squire at heart, as are you in this room, and yeoman farmers as well. We all want our taxes low, do we not? Well, I have done my best to keep heavy taxes away from you. That I consider my greatest deed for you. Who likes to pay high taxes anyway?
Robert Walpole's allowance of that sort of autonomy boded well for those living near the old sawmill in southern Dedham. After 2 rejections by the town of Dedham, and much debate in the general court of the province of Massachusetts Bay in Boston, it came to pass on December 10th, 1724, that the town of Walpole was born. It was announced in Boston on September 28th of that year. And this, here, we can all read this together because this is all of us. Let's read that aloud. Whereas
I could not resist. Indeed. I have received, ladies and gentlemen, many rewards in my time. Knighthoods, the Order of the Bath, and the Order of the Garter. But when it comes down to it, the most important thing for me is the prosperity of all of you, of all British subjects throughout the realm, including these colonies. In fact, if I may quote myself, the strength of a nation lies in the unity of its people. That being said, good people, I raise a glass to you. Your independence and loyalty as British subjects, and your naming of your kind town, Walpole, after me. Would you join me in a cheer of 3 cheers? Ready? Hip, hip, huzzay! Hip, hip, huzzay! Hip, hip, huzzay! In honor of all of you, and thank you very much for this wonderful evening. Downed it in 1. And I would also like to thank 2 very important people who helped me put all this together when I was asked to do it. Our very own Betsy Dyer from the Historical Society of Walpole. Please. And my dear friend Matthew Mees, who knows more about all of this than I could ever hope to. And, of course, the one who was with me every step of the way from the very beginning of the offer by Philip. Thank you, Philip. Round of applause for Philip and Barry. But the one who was there with me from the very beginning to this very moment, standing in the back of the room, trying not to be noticed, my dear and lovely wife, Annie Lepage. But this is your celebration. We will, and I will have help, I have 2 big brains up here, field questions that you might have. Yes, madam?
Who made your outfit?
You perhaps have met him. His name is Henry Cook, and he resides in Randolph. And it was finished, I was there Friday night. Put it that way.
Tell us a little more about Henry, though. He's very interesting.
Henry Cook, if you have not, any of you not had the opportunity to visit the Lewis House in the center of town, he restored light infantry uniforms of the Walpole Light Infantry and other uniforms as well, one of which is being displayed at Old Sturbridge Village. He is sought after by every reenactor you can think of and every museum you can think of all across the country. He is the greatest tailor there is, and this is his specialty, clothing such as this.
hand sewn, all hand sewn.
And it's all hand sewn.
And it's got many layers. You had to put them on one at a time.
I did, and I did hear, trying to dress myself, perhaps that was my mistake this afternoon, I did hear a little rip in the waistcoat when I tried to put it on. So I will be seeing Henry very shortly.
Is it comfortable? Especially the wig, is it?
It is. When you do this long enough, it is. Does anyone want to know what happened to Sir Robert? I will be very brief. Remember how I have mentioned a few times tonight, staying out of war, have I not? Well, that would be his undoing. Because, and taxes, and I had just finished saying that I was very much about keeping land taxes low. Unfortunately, that did not make the merchants in London very happy because that's where the taxes came from. There were a series of taxes, the gin tax, correct? And it created riots over the gin tax. Imagine taxing someone's gin. The Porteous riots, where soldiers fired into the crowd. All of that made him unpopular, but the supreme undoing was a war with a very strange name you might not have heard of before. The War of Jenkins' Ear. And it happened because of trade with the Spanish and concessions in a treaty that Sir Robert Walpole made. And it made him unpopular. I made a point of pointing out Mr. Hogarth and his prints. And Mr. Hogarth's prints were very vivid in the evils of the Walpole way. Can you see evil in a great deal of money being spent by a certain group of people when there are a whole lot of the rest of the people? That had much to do with it as well. But it was and I saw a couple of gentlemen walking with Patriots hats, and I could not help myself. The opponents, the merchants in London and the cities who were against him because he was trying to keep land taxes low. Well, someone has to pay a tax, right? So he figured that the merchants in London and the other cities would pay them, and they disagreed. And they wanted a war against Spain for disagreements over overseas trade and ports of entry and all of that, to the point where Spain was actually boarding Spanish sailors, where their supposed Coast Guard was boarding. They're a very irregular Coast Guard, by the way. Privateers, for the most part, boarding British ships. The war hawks, the merchants, who called themselves patriots, had had enough. They got enough votes over time to the point where Walpole lost power and moved on to the House of Lords. And that's where the Sir Robert Walpole comes from, the Earl of Orford, and still had the king's ear. And then once losing power, I believe, I want to say 1743, and died shortly thereafter on his estate. But we all know him today for things such as overseas trade, for things like the South Sea scandal. We've been revisited by inflated markets and companies that have bottomed out, and disputes between countries over trade, and, oh, by the way, with an election coming, party politics. So all of these things, you might say that Sir Robert was the father of, to one degree or another. So the system that we know and always love to this day, with our two-party system, and vying for power and an age of consumption and profit and scandals, goes, oh, of course it goes back before then, but it is most well known by starting in that time period. But I still think he did more good than bad. Yes?
I have a question. Sorry. I have a question for Matthew, because I think the other day you addressed this. Matthew, this is after his death. New Hampshire names Walpole, Maine names Walpole, and Illinois all the way into. What was your hypothesis?
Because there was a lot of migration of people. They were literally running out of land in eastern Massachusetts, and families were sending family members north to New Hampshire. So you can guess that Walpole, New Hampshire was founded by people from Walpole, Massachusetts. And the same with Maine. It's a little odd, Maine, because Maine was still part of Massachusetts in '72, but they like Walpole. In Walpole, Illinois.
That was a surprise, 1857.
But it's the same thing, where people from Walpole are going west. Around the Revolution, they were all going to the Western Reserves, which was Ohio in that time. And then by the 1850s, they're settling Illinois. So people will carry, that's why you have a Sudbury, Ontario.
So did the town of Walpole get any benefit from naming themselves after you?
Being left alone. In all seriousness, one of Walpole's trademarks was to let people make money. He tried very hard not to interfere in colonial government, unlike men such as Sir Edmund Andros, who in various times through our colonial period, there were those that tried to interfere, and of course Andros was arrested and locked up for a time. But this ties in very well with Betsy's talk about Walpole during the Revolution, because that kind of autonomy is something that people get very used to, do they not? So what happens with all of this live and let live business after the last war against the French and the Indians in 1763, and Parliament tries to directly tax the colonies? They don't like it. They've never been directly taxed, and they don't like it. So that is almost, it could be a stretch, but you could almost say that his policies aided what would become the American Revolution, because he believed in leaving us alone. It was a vast empire. Why would they spend all of their time in Parliament worrying about these colonies when there are places in India, and there's trade with China, and there are the West Indies and the East Indies, and all of the sugar plantations to the south and the Caribbean? The big picture was more important to Walpole, and staying in office, that helps, than just these colonies. So, and it's 3,000 miles away. So time and distance had much to do with the Revolution, as well as Sir Robert's policies. Yes, I saw hands over here.
What is the status of the estate today, the manor house and all the grounds? Is that a tour or a historical?
It's lived in by his family. It's one of the, the people with titles. But I think it's partly open to the public, which is why I was able to get a hold of some pictures of it. So it's one of those great big mansions that gets tours.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
There's people that live there, though. Yeah.
And take your modern device, and you can take a visual tour of it, which I did at lunch at work one day. It's beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Stunning. Yes, sir.
Yeah, and the selection of the name for Walpole for the town, was that initiated by people living in Walpole, or did that get selected by?
Yes, the organizers of the town would have that in their
So
position.
it came from Walpole?
Yes, it came from here.
And that's because they recognized the good that
I think so. I mean, it's not like the town of Hancock, Mass, named themselves because they thought John was going to give them money. I don't think that they had that kind of fantasy.
I've heard it said that Franklin was named after Benjamin Franklin because he gave him library books.
That could be. But that does sound like Ben, yeah.
And the countryside, as time went on, tended to be more Whiggish than Tory. Tories became more and more of a minority as we get close to the American Revolution. So I'm sure the sentiments of the people in the countryside in places such as Walpole had a lot to do with it as well. I mean, what they knew of him, they particularly liked being left alone. So Tories tended to be the wealthier merchants in Boston, and tended to have more money, and there were fewer of them, and there were always arguments over money. Gold standard, paper currency. There was a land bank in the 1740s that was basically pitting wealthy merchants against everybody else. So everybody else tended to be Whiggish in their politics. Yes?
Did Walpole ever travel to the North American continent or to any of the other colonies of England, Great Britain?
Not that I've read, no. He was kept very busy in England. And why would you go there when you can go to Houghton Hall?
He was prime minister for 24 years. And pretty much there weren't any prime ministers before him. There were heads of privy councils, that were all tied in with the royalty. But to have a commoner in charge of a body of government was invented by Walpole. And he, I think, remains the longest lived prime minister for the United Kingdom.
Yes, ma'am.
So is was the Prime Minister's role then similar to what it is now?
No, he was not actually even given that title. The title Prime Minister comes later. The Prime Ministers, such as Lord North during the American Revolution, it wasn't even the official title. It was just, they were the Prime Minister. I think it becomes an official title in the next century, in the 19th century. Right. And of course, he was also called the Great Man, but it was not a compliment. It was a snide remark at his expense. Yes?
Back in the 90s, I actually visited a small village in East Anglia called Walpole. How did I happen to be there? It abuts a small village in East Anglia called Medfield. It's spelled with a T.
How interesting.
Yeah, and there was a group from Medfield that would go over to Medfield for a week in June. And it was a limit of 15 people. The initial contacts were made through the church in Medfield and the church in Medfield. And we would go there, tour the surrounding areas. The neighboring towns include Needham, Attleboro, and Framlingham, with the Albert even had a Framlingham College. Kingdom, many of the names of the towns here. Unfortunately, the people who organized it in Medfield aged out of the job, and we haven't done it for 20 years. But it was very interesting. I presume that the Walpole town was to be named in your honor.
Well,
it's a very small town.
Quite all right.
Almost insignificant.
Significant in its own way.
The village of Medfield has a population of about 500.
Should I offer him a bribe to take me and my wife with us? Any other? Oh, I see a hand way in the back.
This is just a sort of a comment that I thought was interesting. Last year we visited London and we took a tour of the House of Parliament. And Robert Walpole is one of the few statues in the Hall of Saints. And the tour guide there actually, didn't know we were from Walpole, but was talking about Walpole. Talked about a couple of the statues there. And the term the Prime Minister was originally, this guy said, a sort of a taunt, a kind of a joke by his political enemies, because Walpole was so full of himself, but he was sort of at a time when there was a lot of divisiveness between the king and the crown and these people in Parliament ruling in the House of Commons and Lords. Walpole was the one person who really made an effort to try to liaison to the king from Parliament to the king. So he was sort of very much in the king's favor, and that became very useful to Parliament. And so it was sort of a joke, Mr. Prime Minister, he's the Prime Minister. And that was how the origin of the term, I thought it was kind of really funny.
I do
started as a joke.
Newspapers. Another thing you can research on your own is go through William Hogarth's prints of the era, covering everything from the people to the court system to Parliament to men like Walpole to the South Sea scandal. They're fabulous. You had a question in the back, sir.
Any more historical context, Jonathan Swift and Robert Walpole, his writings and his effect?
Just that they were enemies.
Well, there's a character in Gulliver's Travels that is supposed to be after Walpole, but it's subtle. I mean, it's
Yeah.
not one of the really obvious characters. It's a minor treasurer for the government or something, but it's supposed to be Walpole.
Isn't that wonderful? Don't you love writers? I'll get back at him. Master of the Rebels, my foot. I'll write a character and I'll make him look horrible. I love that. And it's a great book, too. Anyone else? Yes, madam.
Is the town the same size as it was when it was originally incorporated?
I will refer that to you. The town of Walpole.
No, in fact, I think I actually put the population up there.
Geographically, I think.
Geographically. Oh, the borders have changed in all kinds of fascinating ways that we can't get into. John Anderson here is an expert on that. Should stop by the Walpole Historical Society. And John Anderson will tell you how Norwood shifted and Sharon shifted and pretty much every single Foxborough shifted. All the way into the 1930s, this kind of thing was happening. But we don't have time for that right now, right, John Anderson?
That sounds like a great talk to me. And I want to tell you that, and it's not over yet, not over till the new year, but this has been a wonderful year of the 300th for Walpole. My wife and I marched in the parade on behalf of the society last Saturday, and it was a beautiful day, and we had some other friends with us. I was dressed as John Adams for the occasion, visiting. But it was a beautiful day. It was a great parade. So we probably waved to you and don't even know it.
Other questions for, one more question?
I was just curious, so at the time, was there any other name that might have come up? Was there ever any discussion about another name, or was that just it?
You know, we were talking about that earlier. The selectmen probably would have had a clerk writing down the discussion, but it could be at the Mass Archives.
Why would you want another name?
I just was curious.
I have an answer for everything.
I'm sorry. Vote or anything like that.
Cedar Swamp.
So, did you know the question?